If you've never had dinner in a Jell-O mold, you haven't truly tasted the 70s. This was the era of pineapple-glazed meats, mile-high casseroles, and desserts that looked like science projects. Some were brilliant, others unforgivable. But all 100 are dishes you need to taste at least once, just to say you survived the 70s. Back in the 1960s and 70s, diet sodas were all the rage. Companies were racing to deliver sugar-free drinks that actually tasted good, and one of their secret weapons was cyclamate. Found in brands like Tab and Diet Pepsi, this artificial sweetener was 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar, meaning just a tiny amount could make a soda taste refreshingly sweet without the calories. It was cheap too, making it a favorite for manufacturers eager to cash in on the booming diet craze. Cyclamate-sweetened drinks were practically a lifestyle. People who wanted to cut calories but still enjoy a fizzy treat stocked their fridges with them. You'd see slim cans of Diet Right or No-Cal sitting next to casseroles and TV dinners, ready to be cracked open with a satisfying hiss. It was the go-to drink for weight-conscious Americans, and many swore it tasted better than the saccharin-based alternatives. But by 1969, the party was over. After studies linked cyclamate to bladder cancer in lab rats, the FDA swiftly banned it. The science was debated for years. Many argued the amounts tested were excessive, but the ban stayed. Let's start with the egg foo young. Omelets are no stranger to being the go-to breakfast for Americans. The egg foo young was no different. The egg foo young was particularly liked because it diverted from traditional omelet recipes and added a savory gravy into the mix. Standing out as more of a main course rather than a breakfast, the egg dish would come with several toppings like seafood, vegetables, and drizzles of sauce. Egg foo young could be traced back to the 70s as it was part of a Chinese cookbook that was released in English. All dishes have a burning point, and sadly, despite being popular amongst many consumers, egg foo young's demand started declining. Soon enough, staggering amounts of restaurants discontinued this dish and removed it from their menu. The dish was picked up by local Chinese and Cantonese restaurants in the US who brought the incredible taste back. Ever heard of a peanut butter and pickle sandwich? While both pickles and peanut butter are popular choices for bread-based goodness nowadays, there was once a time when people mixed the pickles into the peanut butter to make a sandwich. Around the 1970s, the peanut butter and pickle sandwiches really started taking off, particularly dill pickles. Something about the spice and tang of a pickle added a lot of character to a basic peanut butter sandwich. It helped that a sandwich loaded with vegetables was always more filling. On a budget or on an energetically challenged day where you cannot get yourself out of bed, this sandwich worked wonders for the masses. We definitely want this one back in lunchboxes and fridges in many states like the good old days. Starting off, we have lard-fried donuts, which might make your modern healthy stomach uneasy, but for the grease lovers of the 1990s, this was as close as you got to heaven. Donuts today are usually fried in vegetable oil because it does not cause your calorie deficit plans for the week to go up in smoke. Now, lard-fried donuts, on the other hand, traded health for taste, and while an average consumer may have had more trips to the doctor, they were happier. Buttermilk or chocolate lard-fried donuts were the food you would bring to a date, a movie night, or just a snack to binge on when you were not feeling too good. Of course, most donut places adopted much better cooking practices, even if they sacrificed natural flavor to do it. Let's start with something that was harmful, but people thought was not too bad if they even knew about it. One of the most widely used sweeteners back then was cyclamate. It would be used in soft drinks that children and teenagers regularly consumed, as well as all kinds of canned fruit. You could not even escape it in salad dressings, not that people were trying to back then. As we said, it was hard to know the effects of these things, since a lot of concise studying hadn't been done. Plus, it was a really good sweetener and was a key factor in the taste that made a lot of products sell. On October 18th in 1969, it was found that it posed a risk of cancer as well as nerve damage, and it was thus banned from use nationwide. Maybe food tasted more bitter as a result, but we imagine constant medical torture to be worse. Moral of the story being, there is nothing that tastes good enough to warrant even a 0.1% risk of cancer. Well, that's about to change. Magic cookie bars got their start from an Eagle brand recipe in the 60s and caught everyone's attention with their awesome taste and texture game. Imagine a buttery graham cracker crust layered with sweetened condensed milk, then piled with chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, coconut, and nuts. It's a chewy, gooey slice of heaven. They were a cinch to whip up and didn't need much time in the oven, which made them a hit for busy bakers and holiday times. Interestingly, they also go by the name Hello Dolly bars in some regions, adding a bit of theatrical flair to their homey appeal. But as years passed and people started leaning towards fresher and less processed goodies, the craze for these bars kind of fizzled. Usually they were cut into squares or bars, rocking a no-fuss, rustic vibe that made them super easy to serve and enjoy. The mix of sweetened condensed milk with coconut and chocolate created a taste that screamed 1970s home baking. One dish that embodied this philosophy was chicken in a biscuit casserole, a simple yet filling combination of shredded chicken enveloped in a creamy, savory sauce, all crowned with golden, flaky biscuit dough. Though its origins are difficult to pinpoint, dishes like this became increasingly common as canned soups and refrigerated dough products surged in popularity. Convenience was king, and busy households needed meals that could be prepared with minimal effort yet deliver maximum comfort. The emergence of electric ovens in nearly every home made baking casseroles an everyday affair, and this particular dish quickly earned its place at dinner tables across the country. Biscuits had long been a staple in rural American cuisine, and combining them with a hearty, protein-rich filling was a logical step forward. Today, modern interpretations lean toward health-conscious adaptations, replacing condensed soups with homemade roux-based sauces or swapping in whole wheat biscuits. So with fish sticks and tartar sauce, the thing is, it really is a good dish. I have to give credit where it's due. It can hold its own in a number of situations. It's also the perfect kind of thing for more casual dinners, hangouts, and get-togethers too. That kind of also starts to make you wonder why something like this isn't really that popular anymore though, right? Well, I think, honestly, the trends have just changed. Fish sticks were once something that even people outside of coastal cities really enjoyed because they were almost the perfect mid-hangout food. Also, tartar sauce was hard to beat as a dip with fish sticks. They just brought out the best in each other. Now let's say you're mid-conversation during a Lakers game with your main man, and you don't feel like going to the trouble of spending an hour in the kitchen getting something ready to eat. That's totally cool. We've all been there. Let's say you're having a lazy Sunday with the wife at home and you both just can't be bothered. A perfectly normal situation to have fish sticks in. But these days, people just order stir-fry. So we're going to start our list off with Harvey Wallbanger cake, which is actually named after a cocktail. When you start to think of the origins of any good cake, you'd hardly associate it with alcohol unless we're talking about the French. The cocktail was just as much of a hit as the cake, though, and it was one of the best inventions of Donato Antone in the 50s, a renowned bartender. Mixed with Galliano liquid, the cocktail was one of the most hotly demanded drinks any hour at any bar. The cake itself was meant to imitate this drink too, and it makes use of the same liquor. Don't worry, I promise you can't get tipsy off of it, but you'd best buckle in for a dessert experience your taste buds are not used to at all. The cake was even noted for having a glaze of Galliano on top after the baking was done. It was at the height of its popularity during the 1970s, which was a pretty experimentative time for baking and drinks alike. Something of a novelty dish, it became pretty popular thanks to a successful marketing campaign that McKesson Imports, a distributor of Galliano, ran. They profited off of both ends, and I gotta say, that's one smart way of doing things. You get a sweet citrusy cake with some liquor-heavy undertones, but an overall smooth and zesty blend of flavors. Despite how it sounds, the cake is pretty light, and it's a joy to eat. Would you try cake mixed with booze, or do you like your liquor strictly in glasses? Before pasteurized eggs became the standard, raw eggs were a common ingredient in homemade recipes, especially in rich, creamy dishes like eggnog and mayonnaise. It was just how things were done. Grandma didn't think twice about cracking a fresh egg straight into the blender to whip up a batch of silky mayo or stirring raw yolks into a holiday eggnog that packed as much punch as the bourbon inside it. It was tradition, and nobody questioned it until they had to. By the late 20th century, food safety experts started raising alarms about the growing risk of salmonella contamination. Unlike today's commercially pasteurized eggs, the ones sitting in a 1970s fridge came straight from the farm, sometimes with a little extra nature still on the shell. A contaminated egg here and there wasn't enough to stop the show, until outbreaks became harder to ignore. By the 1990s, regulations tightened, and pasteurized eggs became the safer choice. Despite the risks, plenty of old-school cooks still swear by the taste and texture of raw egg mayo and eggnog. Some argue pasteurization dulls the flavor, while others simply miss the thrill of living on the edge. Picture this. Stagflation in the 70s is influencing inflation in the US, and people can barely afford to spend money on items that make them feel good. This is when beef Wellington was introduced, a cheap dish that would make you feel high-end while eating it. You might have seen it many times on MasterChef USA because every chef in America knows that the beef Wellington is a special dish. The dish did not achieve immediate success amongst people, as only big restaurant chains were serving beef Wellington. But when American chef Julia Child featured a beef Wellington recipe on her show, suddenly everyone wanted to make a beef Wellington. As beef prices shot up, less and less restaurants served beef Wellington. But as times improved, the dish would subtly crawl back in the many high-end kitchens. While the taste remained the same, the prices shot up drastically. Pickles come in pairs with olives, so it is only right to mention cream cheese and olive sandwiches next. Cream cheese was an ingredient that was already a staple in many American homes because of its popularity in desserts around the 1970s. Olives are, well, olives, and if you do not have a bottle always ready to go, you need to reevaluate your grocery shopping list for this month. Mixing the two made both substantially better, like those power-ups Iron Man gets whenever he puts on a bulkier suit. If people felt really fancy, they would put the olives on the stove for a while and have them fried. Not only was it great on its own, but people also did not stop at just frying. Both of them made for really awesome toppings on meat-based sandwiches. We would not mind seeing more olives on our plate today for sure. They are a classic we feel work in any era. Frying donuts was not the only thing people got up to back then, because fried cheese curds would soon be the next headache of health professionals nationwide. To make matters much worse, states like Wisconsin started having a craze for beer-battered cheese curds. Pair that with deep frying and yeah, you will probably need to get some suits altered. It is not a bad thing to indulge in unhealthy foods, and it is not like most of the cuisine of today is as healthy as it should or could be. People back then liked eating fried comfort food without any regard for health disadvantages. We do not blame them. Fried items are attractive, and frying cheese curds was a unique new recipe in town. Why would they not enjoy the food to their fullest? Funnily enough, these curds are not even the worst offender on the list. Another artificial menace was the super popular food dye, Red No. 2. And trust us when we say the name is appropriate since this raised all sorts of crimson flags in medical tests. Amaranth, as it is legally known, was first legalized in 1906 because it was quite cheap and easy to produce, and you needed just a few specks of the dye to give a vibrant color. It was used in cooking as well as several cosmetics and makeup products, so this thing definitely got around in more ways than one. Unfortunately, Soviet scientists found that this also posed serious risks of cancer if people continued to use it regularly. When we tell you people were pissed, it is an understatement. You know they got Mars to stop making red M&M, even though there was no dye in them? It was not long until it got banned in 1977, and people became more aware of the risks of what is actually in their products. Napoleons, or millefeuilles, are these fancy pastries with layers of puff pastry and pastry cream, all topped off with this slick glazed icing. Originating from France in the 18th century and known for their 1,000 leaves, that's what millefeuille means, these pastries were a big hit in fancy bakeries for their classy look and delicate flavors, perfect for high-end events and fine dining spots. Making them was no small feat, though, and as lighter, simpler desserts became more popular recently, Napoleons started showing up less often. Usually, these pastries were served up in tidy rectangles, with the icing artfully done up to make them total eye candy. The super precise layers and that creamy, flaky vibe are what made munching on a Napoleon feel like a luxury. Scandals and desserts don't usually go hand in hand, but in the 1970s, one particular cake proved otherwise. Watergate cake, a pistachio pudding-infused dessert layered with whipped topping and coconut, became a culinary icon of the decade, not just for its light, nutty flavor, but for the mystery surrounding its name. The origins of the cake are as murky as the scandal it's tied to. While some believe it was named after the Watergate hearings that dominated headlines in the early 70s, others suggest it was a marketing ploy by General Foods, the company behind instant pistachio pudding. What's certain is that Watergate cake became a fixture at potlucks, luncheons, and community gatherings, appealing to those who wanted something sweet with a hint of intrigue. Culturally, the cake represented the era's obsession with instant ingredients and no-fuss baking. Boxed cake mix, pudding powder, and whipped topping were the backbone of convenience cooking, allowing home bakers to create impressive-looking desserts with minimal effort. Today, variations of the cake swap out artificial ingredients for real pistachios and homemade frosting, but the essence remains the same. It's a cake with a name that raised eyebrows and a flavor that kept people coming back for more. If we go back to the 1970s, we're going to discover another really popular dessert, which is rice pudding. Now, far be it from me to disrespect one of the greats. Rice pudding has been around far longer than I have, after all. Still, what's true is sadly still true. The days of glory for rice pudding are definitely far away in the past now. Dude, seriously, back in the 70s, this was all people ate for dessert. How could they not? 1, it was stupid easy to make, and 2, it was really convenient and sweet. All you needed was some cheap rice and milk, and that wasn't really breaking anyone's bank account or putting their budget out of order for the month. What you would get was this perfect dessert supper hybrid that would make perfect sense to have after a big meal or even in the cold winter months. I mean, it was definitely a lot more affordable than ordering a tub of ice cream and a lot healthier too. People have unfortunately started to head in different directions with rice, though. These days, if people do eat it, it's mostly with things like chicken tikka masala or rice bowls like katsu curry. Not really any room left in the current climate for a rice-based dessert. You'd never stop to think cream cheese, grated cheddar cheese, and flavorings like garlic or Worcestershire sauce could be a moment in the culture of American food and eating. Sure, you'd think it was a great meal, but an addictive snack people can't keep their hands off of. Still, don't we all agree that that's exactly what cheese balls were? The cheese balls that we know and love really started popping off in the 1960s to 1970s. They became heavily associated with party culture and the nightlife. You'd see them at bars, cocktail parties, and even as snacks at clubs. Later on, you'd start seeing them all throughout vending machines in pre-packaged forms. But the classic way to make it is something I bet you won't see coming. Did you know they rolled these balls in chopped nuts, like pecans and almonds, then rolled them again in herbs and different spices, ultimately serving them with crackers? That's definitely a flavor you wouldn't find in anything that comes in a packet. Since then, cheese balls have dominated a lot of snack times and post-lunch binge eating in homes all over the nation. They've also been a part of events like how in Philadelphia, a 1.2-pound ball was made for an event about different kinds of cheese. They work with a lot of different flavors that are easy to make in batches, and kids and adults alike go crazy over them. What's not to love here? Bright red candies, cherry-flavored snacks, and even some holiday treats in the 1970s owed their bold color to a single ingredient: red dye number 2. It was everywhere, from gumballs to cake frostings, giving sweets that signature vibrant hue that made them impossible to resist. At the time, artificial dyes were a standard part of food production, helping manufacturers make their products more visually appealing. After all, who wanted a dull pink candy when you could have a deep, fiery red one? The problem? Red dye. Number 2 wasn't as harmless as it looked. By the mid-1970s, scientific studies linked it to potential health risks, including concerns over carcinogenic effects. When Soviet researchers published findings suggesting a connection to cancer in lab rats, the US had no choice but to take a second look. public concern mounted, and in 1976, the FDA banned the dye, triggering a nationwide panic. Some candy makers scrambled to find alternatives, while others simply pulled their red products from shelves altogether, resulting in the infamous disappearance of red M&Ms, even though they didn't actually contain the dye. Today, red dye number 2 is a thing of the past, but artificial food colorings are still debated. In the Midwest, especially around Wisconsin, there was a holiday tradition that might make modern food safety inspectors break into a cold sweat. Spam musubi's origins are pretty surprising. Originally popular in Hawaii, this spam and rice sushi dish had American soldiers charmed. While it was actually meant for housewives, WW2 soldiers popularized the dish because of the ease with which it could be prepared. They were huge fans of the dish, considering spam was one of the few meats they could easily access during service. So spam musubi was perfect for soldiers who wanted a good meal without too many ingredients. This dish really picked up in popularity around the 1970s. However, its sudden popularity went down after a while. Nowadays, you can still find spam musubi in some Japanese-American fusion joints. It is slowly spreading once again as a reliable breakfast option, making a slow and steady comeback for people who are not soldiers yet want a delicious meal. Ham and banana sandwiches are less digestible both literally and figuratively than most of the list, but they actually worked quite well. The trick was in how you sliced them, because if the banana slices were fat and thick while the ham was thin, you would have a really overly sweet sandwich. Meanwhile, if you did the opposite, then you would have a mushy sandwich that did not have any real flavor. If you did get the proportions right, and most people did after their first few tries, then you had a 70s DIY delicacy with simple ingredients. It made sense why most people did not know how to make a good one, because it was not common. People who lived in other decades hated fruit and meat mixes of savory dishes, but they had a lot more room to make an impression with the crowd in the 70s. Maybe people felt very tropical for a decade? The sandwich would be quite an interesting addition in menus today. When we say cheese curds were not the worst offenders, we were not kidding, because deep frying went too far when deep-fried Mars candy bars were born. Donuts? Fine, they get fried to begin with. Cheese curds? All right, fried cheese works by frying Mars candy bars? Is sanity just a lost concept? People strangely loved this abomination more. Whether it was brought over by foreigners or was the nightmare brainchild of an experimental foodie, it was popular enough for people to consume it widely in many states. Some locals would even take it a step further and cover the chocolate with batter before deep frying it, because it might not have enough fat. You should really always make sure you get your fat needs taken care of. Since more Americans were getting worried that their needs were being taken care of a bit too much, deep-fried Mars became a thing of the past, and we say good riddance. Red number 2 might have been out of the picture, but Red 40 was already on its way to sneak into people's systems and cause an unwarranted scene. If you ever grew up eating maraschino cherries, which you usually could buy at the store, you might have remembered how awfully bright-looking they were, which was all thanks to the dye that was used on them. That same dye had a pesky little carcinogen in it called benzidine, which got these sweet cherries a bad rep for being linked to allergies, migraines, and mental issues in children. The lesson here might be that not everything that tastes sweet ends up being nice, but a lot of poor children and adults alike genuinely could not have known better. Back in the late 70s, Jell-O rolled out pudding pops, turning the frozen treat game on its head with something way creamier than the usual ice pops. Made from milk, sugar, and pudding mix, these pops were all about delivering a super smooth, rich taste. At their peak, pudding pops were so popular that they spawned a range of flavors, including chocolate, vanilla, and swirls. They totally stood out, thanks in part to those catchy Bill Cosby ads shouting, "Pudding in a pop." That marketing charm made these treats a big deal in households across the board. But even with their popularity, Kraft decided to cut them from the lineup in the early 2000s. They were trying to slim down their product range. The bright, fun packaging and that quirky non-wood stick are what a lot of folks remember about them. Few dishes capture the essence of 1970s home cooking quite like a hearty casserole. Built on layers of ground beef, sliced potatoes, and condensed soup, hamburger potato bake was a staple in American households looking for a meal that was both economical and filling. Casseroles had already been a kitchen favorite for decades, but by the 70s their popularity soared thanks to the widespread availability of convenience foods. Canned soups, frozen vegetables, and pre-shredded cheese made it easier than ever to put together a meal without spending hours in the kitchen. Dishes like this weren't just about nourishment, they were about efficiency. This particular recipe found a home in rural communities and suburban neighborhoods alike, offering an easy way to stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal that could feed an entire family. Modern adaptations often swap canned soup for homemade sauces and experiment with different seasonings. But at its core, this dish remains unchanged. A testament to the time when dinner meant gathering around the table, sharing a meal that was made to last. Speaking of stir-fries, one of the more common ones that wasn't inspired by Asian culture was actually cabbage and sausage stir-fry. And this is definitely something you'd only see in the 70s. First of all, let's be honest. How many Gen Z or Gen Alpha kids do you know that would genuinely ask for cabbage stir-fry for lunch? Uber Eats has the game on deadlock, and that means that people really don't eat stuff like this anymore. Back in the 20th century, though, it was possible for something like cabbage to rise to stardom and even stay at the top and maintain a chokehold on people's diets. Why? Well, that's partially due to the 3-decade-long period filled with 3 history-defining disasters in the 20th century, namely the Depression, the Dust Bowl, and the World Wars. Quite a trifecta, isn't it? Still, that's when cabbage got so popular in America as a cheap and affordable nutrition-filled option that people started to eat it almost non-stop. Adding bits of leftover sausage to the stir-fry gave it a neat little protein element, and that cemented the dish as a rustic 20th century classic for when the going gets noticeably tougher than usual. You love a good pot pie. I love a good pot pie. They're kind of that one thing that just brings every family member together. Bonds have been mended over a good pot pie, and new ones have been made, especially when the pie tastes as good as a pinwheel steak pot pie. Now, I'm not talking about just any old variation on your typical pie. Let me explain what sets this pie in particular apart from the others. It's all in the pastry dough and how it's wrapped around the steak, sliced into individual rounds, and then baked before being topped with even more pastry. The chef keeps doing this until you have a full-fledged pie, and what you end up with is the quintessential American comfort food experience. This thing got so popular that companies like Swanson were churning out frozen food versions of the pinwheel pie. Don't even get me started on all the restaurants that relied on this for a cash-filled closing on Saturday night. Let's talk about why it's so good, though. You get carrots, peas, a hearty steak made of ground meat, more pastry than you've probably had in a while, steak gravy, and beans to get a savory showstopper. This pie has an extremely rich flavor profile, and nothing about it shies away from that fact. Rather, it embraces its boldness. You know you're in for a heavy meal when you order this. Plus, it didn't help that it looked real pretty too, which made it a great choice for those family gatherings. Raw ground beef served on rye bread, often topped with onions and a dash of salt and pepper. Known as cannibal sandwiches, this dish wasn't some underground delicacy. It was a staple at family gatherings, particularly around Christmas, when butchers sold the freshest beef and people trusted their local meat markets to provide high-quality, bacteria-free cuts. Eating raw meat might sound risky today, but for decades, it was considered perfectly normal in certain communities. The preparation was simple. Freshly ground beef, preferably from a trusted butcher, was spread onto slices of rye bread, sometimes with a smear of butter or mustard. Some enjoyed it with a side of pickles, others with a cold beer. To those who grew up with it, the taste was rich, the texture smooth, and the risk? Barely a thought. That changed as foodborne illnesses became a growing concern. By the late 20th century, increased cases of E. coli and salmonella made raw beef a serious health hazard. Equally offensive to most conservative taste palates were pineapple and cheese sandwiches. As of 2024, it is a well-established fact that the West and pineapples have had a very troubled relationship. Pineapples try their best for America, and America acts like an alcoholic husband that cannot notice his wife even on their anniversary. Back in the 70s, this was still a new culinary ground people were treading, just like ham and banana sandwiches. What they found was that it did not have the potential to go very mainstream, but it could grow itself a strong, loyal, and niche following. Most fans of this sandwich were in Hawaii, but in surrounding states, the trend took off moderately successfully. People loved the overly sweet and oddly comforting sensation of the sandwich, and we can see why. Pineapple and cheese sandwiches sound oddly delicious if you really think about it. Another popular snack turned into a fried food was fried Oreos. Now we know what you are thinking, that these are probably even worse than Mars. While we would not blame you, fried Oreos were popular with so many people that the taste was its only saving grace. Oreos dipped in a creamy batter, then deep-fried, tasted like heaven to young adults. As the recipe got trendier, people across the states thought it might be worth trying. Unfortunately, America did not seem to think so when it would move toward the 80s and early 2000s. More and more people disliked the idea of greasy food, and all the excess sugar really did not make it more appealing. Deep-fried Oreos went back to being a bad idea on a Saturday night, and people started having Oreos with milk, as God intended. Jell-O gelatin is a pretty tasty treat for an even better price for those who remember it. But did you know how many artificial sweeteners and harmful dyes were loaded in this one? If the past few names on the list were bad to you, then this might cause you to stop and think for a bit. A lot of additional stuff used in the gelatin, especially lots of food dyes for its various different flavors, were pretty harmful and caused skin issues as well as bloating, stomach discomfort, and nausea. With the way people consumed them, these otherwise lighter symptoms spiraled out to the point where, long-term, people's immune systems were going down the drain. This made them vulnerable to a lot more than just one specific type of health nightmare. Luckily, there was a push for gelatin products with no food dyes in the market, and brands like Kroger responded with new lines of Jell-O without all the worrisome fake stuff. Decadent, savory, and packed with flavor, stuffed meats were a sign of a well-prepared meal in mid-century America. By the 1970s, home cooks were finding ways to elevate traditional dishes without breaking the bank, and stuffed deviled chops became a standout example. The idea of stuffing pork chops wasn't new, but the addition of a spicy mustard-infused breadcrumb mixture gave this dish its signature deviled twist. Deviling, a term that dates back to the 18th century, refers to the practice of adding bold seasonings like mustard and pepper to intensify flavor. By the time this recipe gained popularity, deviled eggs had already cemented their place in American cuisine, and this pork dish followed suit. Culturally, stuffed deviled chops fit right into the era's love of hearty, oven-baked meals. While modern cooking often leans toward leaner cuts and lighter flavors, this dish still has a place on the table. Today's versions might swap out white breadcrumbs for whole grain alternatives or introduce apple-based stuffing for a sweet, savory balance. But one thing remains unchanged. When done right, a stuffed pork chop is still a meal worth savoring. Another thing that was really exclusive to the 1970s was the country's rediscovered love for casseroles. Things like hot dog casseroles are just proof of this all around. But really, you had a casserole for just about every fruit, ingredient, and meat you had ever heard of. The deal with this one is that it was a cheap casserole and a super beginner-friendly one. Seriously, your nephew could make this if you gave him honest instructions and believed in him enough. I mean, what really is there to do? You just take the pasta and the hot dogs, layer them casserole style, and pop them in the oven. Bam, you're done. And now you have enough food to either share with the family twice over or enough to last you the entire day and then some. Casseroles were super easy to make, convenient, and usually affordable, but could be made with super fancy ingredients if you were feeling like pushing your wallet and could fit just about any taste palette in the entire country. That made them pretty damn hard to beat. Plus, the 70s was known for being a massive return-to-work culture and the grind lifestyle for a lot of Americans, so the need for big, easy, and simple dishes was major. Nowadays, There are a lot of convenient apps and services to do that for you. So there's no need to bother with things like casseroles every other day. It might be named after an opera singer out of admiration for her. After all, Luisa Tetrazzini was one generational voice, but after a few bites of this, you'll be singing too. And it'll be nothing but the praises of a well-made chicken tetrazzini, which is one of Ernest Arbogast's proudest inventions. Arbogast is a pretty heavy name in the cooking industry both in America and France, so if a dish has his seal of approval, you can be assured about the quality. This one in particular makes use of cooked chicken, mushrooms, a sauce that's usually made from cream, and Parmesan cheese. Throw it in with spaghetti and bake it with a crunchy breadcrumb topping, and you have a full-course meal that you haven't experienced before. Baking with spaghetti with mushrooms and cooked chicken or turkey? To the average American, the mix of flavors seems pretty daunting. And being honest, I don't blame you. It's definitely something I'd raise a curious eyebrow, sure, but also a concerning one. Though there's a reason it held its own even in the 70s, which had a slew of dishes that could steal your heart and wallet. The reason it's so budget-friendly is because you can easily assemble this with leftovers too, which is why it was a really popular way to deal with Thanksgiving leftovers. The ingredients are something you'd find in most pantries, and it doesn't take that much to prepare the dish. All in all, it's a pretty good deal. For much of the 20th century, canned foods were a kitchen essential. They were cheap, convenient, and had an impressively long shelf life. Whether it was a can of soup, vegetables, or condensed milk, chances were high that the can itself was sealed with lead solder. It seemed like a practical solution at the time. Lead was easy to work with, and it created a strong, airtight seal that kept food from spoiling. But what people didn't realize was that the lead in those seams wasn't just staying on the outside. Over time, especially with acidic foods like tomatoes or fruit, the lead could leach into the food. And unlike a bad ingredient you can taste or smell, lead poisoning happens slowly. Symptoms could take years to appear, affecting the nervous system, brain function, and even childhood development. The real turning point came in the 1970s, when health experts made the undeniable link between lead exposure and serious health risks. By 1991, lead-soldered food cans were completely banned in the US, replaced with safer manufacturing methods. While today's cans are lead-free, the lesson stuck. Sometimes the biggest dangers aren't the ones you can see. How could we forget eggnog, a holiday favorite that has been a part of American cuisine for a long while? To anyone who has ever had any fond Christmas memories, it simply is not the holiday season until it is eggnog time. Americans love eggnog for its spicy notes and using some of their favorite ingredients. Stuff like rum, milk, and eggs are in the heart of any real U.S. citizen. It is surprising that a dish only made a year can last so long. Eggnog never got discontinued because their recipe was available to everyone at all times. The same fate cannot be told about companies that tried to sell bottled eggnog in the off-brand season. Many milk plants produced packaged eggnog to sell in seasons outside for Christmas, but due to lack of sales, these operations would often immediately shut down. Less and less people would find eggnog in markets once Christmas was over. Fortunately, a few milk processing facilities decided to resume year-round production of eggnog, albeit on a small scale. This allowed for true eggnog lovers to find this packaged drink in specialty stores and in limited locations. You have not seen experimental until you have seen a tuna and apple sandwich. Exactly what it sounds like and worse in reality than in your imagination, a tuna salad mixed with chopped apple slices on white bread. Yes, that is literally the entire concept. And no matter what the fusion food crowd tries to say, we are not trying it or buying into the hype. If only to satisfy the curiosity inside us and scratch that must-try-everything itch would we want this back. But strangely, people in the 70s had the opposite opinion. Cans of Pink Lady tuna and Farmer's Market apples were apparently their idea of a good meal back then. Do you think they were onto something? Maybe we are jumping the gun and should take a note out of their book about being open to new tastes. Deep-fried butter balls are even worse than cheese curds because it's the same idea applied to balls shaped out of butter. Dipped in batter and usually served along with fries or hot wings, these were much more popular than you might think. Sure, they sound simple, but simple and tasty is more or less what an American needs. Deep-fried butterballs became popular enough to be served at state fairs in places like Iowa, Texas, Ohio, and South Carolina. You might be thinking how something so popular would go out of fashion. Well, fashion is dominated by ever-changing trends, and so is food. People would grow to dislike greasy foods that were high in fats and oil like deep-fried butter. At least this is one thing doctors can be happy went out of style today. In the 70s, the phrase, "let's get some shark fin soup," was not really that out of pocket. A lot of people enjoyed bowls of this at many restaurants across the USA, but local shark populations had to pay the price in a pretty nasty way as they got their fins removed and then were left in the ocean. While they were a tradition in some cultures, their use was not nearly as intense as the businesses constantly asking for more fins. Eventually, the Senate passed the Shark Fins Elimination Act, which thankfully now makes shark fin products illegal. Over the years, the constant efforts by hunters and other people looking to make a quick paycheck have endangered species, and today the number of sharks is at a record low. The Watergate cake popping up in the 70s was all about riding the wave of the famous scandal it's named after. This pistachio-flavored cake, made with pistachio pudding mix, sports a funky green color and a nutty taste, lightened up with some club soda. It's usually decked out with a frosting that's also got pudding in it and sprinkled with pecans, making for a pretty unique look and texture. The whole novelty of its theme and the connection to a wild moment in politics helped make it a hit. But as people started digging more natural and less artificially flavored sweets, its star faded. Watergate cake was typically a sheet cake, super easy to slice up for casual gatherings. Few desserts from the 1970s could match the sheer visual spectacle of Crown Jewel dessert. Vibrant cubes of gelatin, suspended in a creamy, airy mixture, created a dish that looked as extravagant as it sounded. But behind its dazzling appearance was a dessert born from convenience, creativity, and the decade's undeniable love of gelatin. Gelatin-based dishes had been a fixture in American cookbooks for decades, but by the mid-20th century, they had evolved from simple fruit molds into elaborate, almost sculptural creations. Crown Jewel dessert, also called broken glass cake, was a natural extension of this trend. With its bright, jewel-toned cubes carefully arranged in a fluffy, citrus-infused base, it became a popular choice for dinner parties, where presentation mattered just as much as taste. Modern versions lean toward natural colorings and homemade fruit gelées, but the original's playful spirit remains intact. Culturally, it reflected the era's enthusiasm for processed ingredients and minimal-effort elegance. Made using boxed gelatin and whipped topping, it was a dessert that looked impressive but required little skill. Some variations used different fruit flavors for contrast, while others swapped whipped topping for a mixture of cream cheese and condensed milk for extra richness. Despite what I just described about the 70s with casserole, you gotta believe me when I say something like zucchini fritters was also at the forefront of the entire decade. That's the thing about the 70s. It's just got so much going on that you can't box it into any single trend or sentiment that was spreading like wildfire. I mean, sure, there was an immense crowd that deeply preferred casserole-style dishes, and they stuck to that belief hardcore, but there was also a big chunk of America that was tired of the high-calorie, high-prep lifestyle of making big dishes that would last you a while. They wanted to switch to greener food that would help keep them lean, and food that would also work with the party culture that was getting so popular during the 70s. People wanted bite-sized snacks they could gobble up when they were tipsy at parties, not big banquet dinners they had to sit down for and really make space for. Lots of people were treating eating as an excuse to socialize and go out, instead of finding genuine new food or eating for sustenance like in the first half of the 20th century. Devil's on Horseback is a pretty daunting name for something that's a Victorian-era appetizer, but hey, it sounds like it kept up with the trends of the time at least. The dish gets even sillier when you hear the ingredients. Before I start telling you, take a small guess. Maybe some seriously hot, throat-busting pepper? A rare, exotic cut of meat? Some kind of complex sandwich? The answer might be a bit of a letdown, but at least the taste isn't. Devils on horseback typically involve things like a prune or dried fruits in a tight and generous bacon wrapping that are then roasted. It's said to have been inspired by angels on horseback. Yes, I know. The irony or the cheesiness is not lost on me, but that one used oysters in place of dried fruit. Still, it was all the rage in the 1970s. Especially at retro bars and cocktail parties, it was a perfect hors d'oeuvre, and it became a snack that you couldn't keep your hands off of at most parties. The most budget-friendly and common version of the dish is basic dry fruits and roasted bacon, but some also use blue cheese stuffings to amp up the comfort food factor. While it wouldn't win any awards in a naming contest, it has always been a staple of best-selling cookbooks and booked-to-the-brim parties. By the 1970s, margarine had secured its place as the healthier alternative to butter. It was cheaper, lasted longer, and, thanks to trans fats, stayed solid at room temperature while giving baked goods that perfect flakiness. Fast food chains and restaurants took full advantage, using partially hydrogenated oils for frying everything from French fries to fried chicken. The result? Crispy, golden perfection with a long shelf life. But what seemed like a miracle ingredient turned out to be a silent killer. Trans fats raised bad cholesterol, lowered good cholesterol, and increased the risk of heart disease, without people even realizing it. For decades, the food industry brushed off concerns, marketing margarine as a healthier alternative while deep fryers across America sizzled with heart-clogging oils. The science was catching up, though, and by the early 2000s, studies confirmed what researchers had suspected for years. Trans fats were among the worst fats you could consume. Regulations followed, and by 2015, the FDA officially declared trans fats unsafe. Companies scrambled to reformulate products, and today, margarine isn't what it used to be. While fried food never went out of style, the days of trans fat-loaded cooking oils are over. By the 1970s, the diet food industry was booming. With calorie counting in full swing, people were looking for ways to satisfy their sweet tooth without the guilt. Another dish just as beloved as the last is sweet and sour pork. This Cantonese dish found its way into the hearts and bellies of Americans with ease in the 19th century. We have early Chinese migrants to thank for the introduction of sweet and sour pork. In America, it is a lot different than the traditional version. You would get small cubed pork alongside diced bell pepper and rice, and a lot of ketchup. This is the version that made its home in the kitchens of Americans everywhere. It exploded in popularity as a guaranteed item on the menu of mom-and-pop joints. Much like other foods on this list, sweet and sour pork faced a hiccup when it temporarily disappeared from restaurants due to the introduction of newer, fancier variations of pork. The demand for this classic dish never went down, and eventually, restaurants were inclined to bring it back. Bologna and cheese sandwiches were sandwiches that you could pull out of the refrigerator and have nobody raising any eyebrows, only happy smiles and eager stomachs. Bologna spreads were not too popular in America until the 70s when they first properly started picking up some steam. People got on the bandwagon once bologna and pepperoni pizzas started becoming regular takeout options in states like New York and Chicago. If it works on a pizza, by the laws of nature, it must be tried on a sandwich or burger too. We are not sure who came up with that rule of thumb, but they were really onto something, because this made for a great sandwich that was a meal people ate when all there was for dinner was sleep. While a lot of those cheeses and spreads got discontinued now, we would love to try an authentic sandwich from the 70s because it sounds right up our alley. Crisco-based frosting was a much-needed break from deep frying both for America in the past and this list. Tasty enough that even grandmas in the past had their own variants and homemade takes, it became a very popular shortening. People loved having this on their cake or dessert, and back then, food analysts had not fully calculated the risks of trans fats. Ever since food science did take that step later on when bans were put on trans fats, the frosting abandoned it. Crisco frosting lacks one thing to make that change appealing, which is any nutritional benefit. Whether you are trans fat-free matters little if you have no health benefit to offer. In the short run, it was Flavor Town, nothing short of a sublime culinary experience. Better to leave shortenings like this in the past than bring them back, though, since shortenings today still do not have any nutritional pros. Speaking of traditions, one long-held custom in upper society and luxury cuisine was beluga caviar, as you may have heard. The USA had an infamously high appetite for it, consuming around 60% of the world's caviar, but that meant that, like sharks, beluga sturgeons were not safe in their own waters. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to ban the buying or selling of any beluga products, as the fish today faces a serious threat of extinction because of overfishing. It might be tasty, but there's certainly no need to fish enough of them to wipe their entire gene pool clean. At least we think that's the sane take. Caviar is still one of the most widely consumed luxury cuisines in America, but beluga caviar has been effectively banned from mass production. Who knows? Maybe one day the rest of the caviar varieties may suffer the same fate. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with Jell-O, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. Jell-O pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into. But as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned towards less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. With the airy texture of a soufflé but the sliceability of a loaf, cheese soufflé loaf was the kind of dish that looked sophisticated but remained approachable, a reflection of how home cooking evolved in the 1970s. This was a decade where French-inspired cuisine gained traction in American households, but not everyone had the time or patience for a traditional soufflé. Enter this clever alternative. By baking cheese, eggs, and a small amount of flour into a structured loaf, home cooks could achieve the delicate, airy texture of a soufflé without worrying about the dreaded collapse. It was a shortcut to sophistication, offering the best of both worlds. Cheese had already been a staple of mid-century cooking, and this dish fit perfectly into the era's love of rich, baked cheese-based recipes. Some versions incorporated sharp cheddar, while others leaned into milder flavors like Swiss or Gruyere. Today, modern adaptations sometimes reduce the flour for a gluten-free twist or introduce herbs and spices for added complexity. But at its core, this dish remains a fascinating example of 1970s ingenuity, where the pursuit of convenience never came at the expense of creativity. Again, disrespecting an icon has never been my scene, but I just don't think peanut butter sandwiches are anyone's go-to breakfast anymore like they used to be in the 70s. Really, when was the last time you stopped and made yourself a genuine peanut butter sandwich you were looking forward to right before heading out for work or college or whatever it is? People would much rather prefer to either grab some takeout, get a cute little coffee these days, or just take their Stanley bottle with whatever electrolyte-boosting drink of the day they have. Don't get me wrong, kids and teens will still eat these up, and they make for some amazing late-night snacks. But I feel like overall we've started to move on a bit from the days where peanut butter sandwiches were reigning supreme over all else, you know? But hey, if you feel differently, please make that known in the comments. Now, despite what you may think, pasta dishes did not start trending in the 2010s like we know it. They've been something America has been deathly scared of for a year. Pasta primavera, on the other hand, was one of the few things that actually took off in the 1970s. It was one of the few dishes besides spaghetti and meatballs to get some kind of traction in the States. Pasta primavera itself is a dish that features vegetables in light sauces, and it was created by Cirio Macchioni. This guy went to Canada and had some Italian-American cuisine and immediately got the inspiration for this. One of the best things about this dish, besides it being immediately budget-friendly while having a sweet flavor, is that it was a sign of the times. The 1970s were kind of this weird self-reflection moment for America, where it was realizing that most people's diet is horrible and too fatty. People wanted to shift to something cleaner, greener, and healthier, and dishes like pasta primavera were paving the way for that. Cirio Macchioni knew exactly what he was doing when he made this, it seems. because this sautéed veggie dish is everything an American diet should include. Saccharin became the answer. Found in everything from diet sodas to sugar-free desserts, it was a game changer. Hundreds of times sweeter than sugar, yet with none of the calories. It didn't taste exactly like sugar, but for those determined to stay slim, it was close enough. Saccharin had actually been around since the late 1800s, but it wasn't until the mid-20th century that it took over the diet market. People stirred it into their coffee, poured it over cereal, and downed it in soft drinks like Tab. It was everywhere, until scientists started raising concerns. In the early 1970s, studies linked saccharin to bladder cancer in lab rats, setting off alarm bells. The FDA responded by mandating warning labels on products containing the sweetener, effectively scaring off a lot of consumers. Despite the controversy, saccharin never fully disappeared. Later research suggested the rat studies didn't translate directly to humans, and by 2000, the cancer warning was removed. Today, it's still around, though it competes with newer artificial sweeteners. Back then, though, it was the diet craze's best friend, until it wasn't. Remember Hormel? Connoisseurs of canned cuisine? They brought corned beef hash to the States in around the 1970s. This hearty breakfast dish has survived the tests of time, as it would be discontinued then brought back almost instantaneously, until the beef hash found a permanent place in American cuisine. The food has ties to WW2, as it was a lot more popular back then to eat canned options or packaged food. Beef hash was particularly well-liked because meat was hard to come by at the time. Fresh meat in particular was always rationed immediately. This made Hormel products a must-buy for people back in the day. While hash has been around in America for even longer, it became really popular in the 40s. Though in the post-war era, it did fall off in popularity, urging the company to discontinue the product. Beef hash made a comeback in the 70s when inflation hit, as people were looking for cheaper alternatives. Since then, this dish has slowly been making a return to many restaurants these days, especially as a cheap takeout option. A basic two-ingredient combo like meat spreads and cheese would continue making their mark with dishes like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. Salami itself was something that Italian-American communities heavily popularized in America around the early 1900s. Restaurants would take the trend and turn it into a surefire facet of American cooking in the 70s with easy and accessible ideas like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. If it works in restaurants, then the next step to making it a long-lasting memory is to make it simple enough for people to eat at home. Cream cheese, some salami, and white bread understood the assignment perfectly, and despite fading away later on, were a beloved sandwich. If you had any Italian family or were in a primarily European neighborhood, you could definitely expect to catch a whiff of these around the block. Maybe cheeses used to be stronger then? Either way, we would love to try this sandwich from the 1970s. Suet pudding did have a lot of benefits to it when you ate it. At least the traditional version did. Now the Americans take on it as not exactly the healthiest variant of suet pudding. Uncle Sam loves his beef and ale, and he imparted that love to citizens across every state. Suet pudding in America would typically be made with beef or steak paired with ale. Savory versions of the dish were not new, but this just abandoned the pudding element of the dish entirely. Calorically, you were sitting at around 86 grams for carbs and 62 grams for fats, but the real numbers were probably much higher. We will not lie though, it does taste pretty good, almost enough that wanting to bring it back seems like a reasonable idea. People went overboard with the dish, as they tend to do when the only thing on their mind is taste. Savory puddings as a whole went out of style recently. This trend of exhausting an entire populations of animals for culinary thrills had spread to a lot more than just life beneath the sea. An example is foie gras, which was created by having ducks and geese go through a rather harmful diet of corn. To the point, they were force-fed the corn to ensure that they were fattened up properly. The damage this did to their livers cannot be stated in simple words, but the livers were the main part, so the market saw no reason to stop its routines. California was one of the first states to step up about it and ban this activity, even though the move got backlash. But even the Supreme Court rejected a case for removing the ban. Hopefully, the rest of the country takes a hint too, because the act of foie gras is quite unethical. Fortunately, most states have now banned force-fed and harmful diets for animals and thus automatically deemed foie gras illegal. Butterscotch brownies, or blondies, mix it up with brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs, and baking powder, all jazzed up with butterscotch chips. These goodies swapped out chocolate for a sweet caramel-like vibe and caught on fast. They were super easy to whip up, making them a go-to for anyone needing a quick dessert fix without the intense richness of chocolate. Their ease of preparation and ability to store well made them popular for potlucks, school functions, and holiday treat exchanges. Over time, though, as bakers got more into gourmet and unique flavors, blondies weren't the main event anymore. Usually, you'd find them cut into squares, laid out on a platter, perfect for grabbing a bite without any fuss. The combo of a chewy middle with a bit of crunch around the edges really made these stand out. Light, delicate, and just the right amount of indulgent, Spanish cream custard was the kind of dessert that felt fancy without demanding hours in the kitchen. A cross between a classic custard and a gelatin dessert, it relied on eggs, milk, and just enough gelatin to give it structure without turning it into a firm mold. The result? A silky, airy treat with a texture somewhere between pudding and mousse. Custards had been a fixture in European and American cooking for centuries, but by the 1970s, home cooks were looking for lighter, more effortless desserts. Spanish cream custard fit the bill. It delivered the richness of a traditional custard while requiring less time over the stove. The added gelatin also gave it an edge, allowing it to hold its shape while still melting on the tongue. Culturally, this dish reflected the era's growing appreciation for international flavors. The name might suggest Spanish origins, but its widespread popularity came from American cookbooks and church recipe collections, where citrus-infused versions became particularly beloved. Today, modern adaptations often replace gelatin with cornstarch for a creamier consistency or introduce plant-based milk for a dairy-free version. Egg group soup is still something you could say is a popular wintertime snack for a lot of people and definitely a comfort food for a niche crowd. But it's not something I would say is in its prime anymore. There were and still are an incredible amount of fans of Chinese cuisine. If anything, that number has only continued to increase with no signs of stopping. I mean, geez, these days we even prefer their TikTok to our own, right? Anyway, that kind of stuff is exactly why egg drop soup got a bit left behind, though. You keep getting exposed to a culture over time, and you start to see more and more of it. More traditional recipes, foods, street foods, heritage dishes, all that. You start to leave behind the popular staples that you once went to because you didn't know anything else. It's unfortunately the same deal for things like chow mein and Szechuan chicken, as good as they are. And don't get me wrong, there's a sizable audience for egg drop soup, because who can beat something that simple and effective? I'm just saying that the audience used to be more regular and bigger. Speaking of healthy, here's something else that followed the exact same tune. Green Goddess dressing is exactly as fancy as it sounds, and it's definitely a step above your average French dressing or Caesar salad. I mean, come on, if we are supposed to eat salads every other day, you gotta keep some different ones in your rotation, right? We have a pretty exciting mix of sour cream, fresh parsley, tarragon, anchovies, and olives to make a rich green dressing that works amazingly as a dip or a salad. See, this dish got super trendy in the 70s because it was one of the first salads that people could eat and enjoy as a standalone meal. It was giving Americans options they didn't know they had, and it definitely boomed in places like California and San Francisco. Even today, it's a classic of the state's cuisine. It was first made by chef Philip Romer during his stay at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, so it's definitely got some backstory with the place. He wanted to make it in honor of the play with the same name. He was a big fan of the main actor in it, George Arliss. Philip thought European sauces were taking over the scene and were too heavy, too narrow. They offered one kind of flavor experience, and he wanted more, so he made something that was more than just that. In the 1970s, home canning was more than just a hobby. It was a way to stretch the grocery budget and keep the pantry stocked year-round. Families filled their shelves with jars of green beans, corn, and carrots, all preserved with time-tested methods passed down through generations. But while fruits and jams could be safely canned with a boiling water bath, low-acid vegetables were another story. Without a pressure cooker, those innocent-looking jars could turn into ticking time bombs for botulism. For years, many home canners relied on boiling water alone, believing that if it sealed, it was safe. Some added aspirin or vinegar, thinking it would help ward off bacteria. Others simply trusted the process. After all, their grandparents had done it. The problem? Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria behind botulism, thrives in low oxygen, low-acid environments like improperly canned vegetables. It doesn't change the taste, smell, or appearance of food, making it nearly impossible to detect until symptoms appear. As cases of botulism poisoning mounted, food safety officials began cracking down, emphasizing the need for pressure canning. We also had chicken marbella, which rivaled beef options like beef hash. Americans have always enjoyed an incredible variety of food. Popular American chefs Julie Rosso and Sheila Lukens popularized and invented chicken marbella, a dish made using chicken, prunes, olives, and capers. The recipe was first seen in the Silver Palette cookbook. The cookbook recipe was very popular in the Jewish community and quickly became popular amongst larger groups of people across America. Towards the 80s, chefs across the country decided that the chicken marbella needed a revamp. This decision would prove costly as people started disapproving of the dish when chefs added sun-dried tomatoes instead of olives. Clearly, they went a bit overboard, and people began to refrain from ordering the chicken marbella. In a frenzy, dinner joints had to remove the chicken marbella from the menu until they could go back to the original recipe. Since then, restaurants have stuck to the OG flavor more keenly. Speaking of protein, canned meat pies were another really popular dish that people could not get enough of back in the day. Standing out from the rest of the crowd at the time by being both delicious and transportable as well as affordable, these pies were a knockout. Stuffed with meat and topped heavily with gravy, they were one of the best Thanksgiving meals after the big turkey. People could not get enough of the varieties of meats that would often be used like buffalo or deer. Giving each can its own unique flavor profile depending on the main ingredient. Sadly, these are probably the most easy to digest and diet-friendly meal on the list today, yet they are nowhere to be found now. Casu marzu, luckily, was not an animal species that was almost wiped out, but a vintage Italian cheese that involved sheep's milk, which was heated and then curdled for 3 weeks. Now this gave it one hell of a flavor and a sensation that other cheese just could not hold a candle to, but the process was beyond icky. Within 3 weeks of curdling, flies would be drawn to the milk and they would bombard it with their eggs, naturally turning into maggots. The maggots would then eat the milk, which had rotted a fair bit by now, and then let out some kind of substance that gave casu marzu its fame. For a lot of people, this might be too much, and that's definitely a fair hill to die on. Luckily, the government is one of those groups, and it banned this cheese for not meeting health standards. Snowball cakes are all about that winter vibe, with their fluffy marshmallow filling and a coating of shredded coconut that looks just like snow. Inside, there's a chocolate sponge cake that keeps everything rich and interesting. These treats got their name from their cool, snowball-like appearance, making them a hit during the holiday season. They used to be all over the place as pre-packaged snacks from brands like Hostess, known for their fun and distinctive look. But as people started choosing more natural and less processed options, snowball cakes kind of faded out. They were usually wrapped up all neat, making them easy to grab and go. By the 1970s, meatloaf had already cemented its place as a weeknight staple in American households. But as the decade embraced tropical influences in cooking, a new variation emerged: Hawaiian meatloaf, blending the hearty comfort of ground beef with the sweetness of crushed pineapple and a tangy glaze. The idea of pairing pineapple with savory dishes wasn't new. Hawaiian-inspired recipes had surged in popularity during the mid-20th century, largely due to the post-war fascination with Polynesian cuisine. The rise of tiki culture, fueled by themed restaurants and island-inspired cocktails, led home cooks to experiment with sweet and savory flavor combinations. Adding pineapple to meatloaf wasn't just about taste, it was about bringing a bit of exotic flair to the dinner table. Canned pineapple was an affordable, shelf-stable ingredient that could transform an everyday meal into something unexpected. Some recipes leaned into the sweetness, while others balanced it with soy sauce or Worcestershire to add depth. Today, Hawaiian meatloaf has found new life with modern adaptations, often swapping breadcrumbs for panko or using leaner meats like turkey. Before I get into why it died down, first, I need to talk about what a hamburger helper even is. This was a packaged convenience food product that General Mills came up with in 1971, and it was a big part of their whole Betty Crocker shtick. The idea was to make something out of a pound of ground beef, and despite the name, there's no hamburger ingredients besides the beef. You had a box with dried pasta, rice, and a seasoning mix. It actually became a big thing in the 70s because it became a symbol of processed food and was one of the most popular packaged products in the nation. On the other hand, it is definitely something I would say is entirely nostalgia-driven now. Hamburger helpers are still available, and they're a convenient meal to go for. Don't get me wrong, but the days of its trends are dead in the water and in the past now. People would go out in droves to get a fix of a hamburger helper back in the 70s, and this was a very much socially expected thing to do, by the way. Like, you know how your friends call you for a round of Chipotle and gossip? That was pretty much the idea back then, too. The things that did this bad boy in are movements like the health-conscious trends that were constantly spreading over America. Lots of people were in favor of healthier, smaller, and leaner meals made using canned food. And their argument was that the national rise of fast food, fusion food, and street food was really just doing a number on everyone's guts. On the other hand, convenience culture really has outpaced dishes like these in longevity, at least. For reasons like these, it's hard to find a good hamburger helper, and even harder still to find someone who still swears by them. Did I mislead you into thinking the 70s were all about getting fit and keeping your cholesterol in the ideal range? It was also a period of exploration of other cuisines, one of those being the tiki style of eating. Tiki cuisine had a lot to take inspiration from, don't get me wrong, but one of the best parts of it was Polynesian chicken. Think of it like this sweet and tangy sauce or glaze that blessed the chicken with its thick, rich flavor. Now, the urge to take more steps towards tiki cuisine was something that was building up in the background since the 1930s, but it all really came to a head in the 1970s. In the 1930s, restaurants such as Don the Beachcomber or Trader Vic's would feature popular tiki dishes. This nationwide interest in other cuisines only really exploded as a movement in the 60s and 70s, though, and Polynesian chicken was a big sign of that. It became something you couldn't separate from Mai Tai, like beer and dried fruit at a local pub. However, it wasn't exactly authentic. This American version has pineapple juice, garlic, ginger, soy sauce, and brown sugar-based sauce, and the chicken breast is marinated in that and served with stirred vegetables. The American take on it seems to up the sweetness a lot, but the original tiki variant plays up the tanginess a lot more. Retro tiki parties from the 70s would still have something that really reflected authentic Pacific Islander cuisine, but whichever version you got, you were in for a great meal. Canned tuna was cheap, packed with protein, and could be turned into everything from tuna salad sandwiches to casseroles. Families relied on it for quick meals, and no one thought twice about how much they ate. Back then, there were no warning labels, no recommendations to limit consumption, just endless recipes encouraging people to make the most of their pantry supply. But there was a hidden problem. Industrial pollution had been steadily increasing mercury levels in ocean fish, and tuna, being a top predator, was absorbing more than its fair share. By 1970, reports surfaced linking mercury in tuna to potential neurological damage, particularly in pregnant women and young children. The FDA took action, setting limits on mercury levels in fish, but there was no official warning on cans. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the government issued clear guidelines advising consumers, especially expectant mothers, to limit their intake of certain tuna varieties. Despite the concerns, canned tuna never disappeared from store shelves. It's still a go-to meal for millions, but with a little more caution attached. We are still continuing the Meat Express because next on the list is Salisbury steak. Dietitian James Salisbury invented the steaks to help out with increased digestive issues and illnesses that were spreading rapidly in the U.S. The now dinner staple, Salisbury steak, involved a hamburger patty and was mostly known to be a steak with high-quality beef and gravies. The healthy aspect was ensured by keeping the gravies homemade and the beef clean. The Salisbury steak started losing customers as illnesses started to decrease in the populace. As a result, lots of restaurants stopped serving it regularly. However, now it is returning. Whether that is due to digestive issues coming back with it or a growing love for the vintage, you can find this at American Steak much more commonly now. Sardine and mustard sandwiches are as basic as they sound and much better than you might initially give them credit for. Be realistic and think about a post-Depression era America where a lot of neighborhoods and homes were still reeling from the effects. Dollars could buy a bit more and went back to their usual strength, but everything was a bit touch and go for a while, and dishes like sardine and mustard sandwiches were the cure. Even more attractive than the taste was the price of this beauty, because for about $1.50 you had yourself a solid meal. Many labor workers, like your friendly neighborhood forklift or dock workers, might remember eating these during their lunch breaks. People would usually spice it up with other vegetables, toppings, and peppers to make a proper feast out of a cheap thrill. And we would like to join the fun too. Another item on the list that also happens to come packaged and is easy to carry around are canned cream soups. Usually these would be your typical soup flavors, and they were cheap and affordable enough to buy regularly. Most great canned items get their start that way, but what really made this a hit was its unique taste that got people hooked. Having canned cream soup on afternoons was something every American in the 60s could relate to. Uniqueness does not always come from good places, though, because this soup's taste came from the fact that it was high in sodium, fats, and preservatives. Being the basis for most casseroles was not really helping its case. After all, there are many better soups to make that are just as easy and twice as healthy. So canned cream soups would be left behind like so many other canned items before it. Bushmeat, on the other hand, is something that carries a natural risk to it. No human interference needed this time. This is an umbrella term that refers to all kinds of animals caught in the wilds of Africa for daily sustenance. And when we say all kinds, please take that to heart. Bats, lions, as well as monkeys, literally nothing is off the table. These wild animals carry diseases with them. And during the Ebola outbreak from 2013 to 2016, governments started banning the hunting and consumption of bushmeat. It is still smuggled in illegally, though, and it goes for a pretty hefty price. Magic Pan crepe cakes come from those Magic Pan restaurants that made crepe dishes a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. Here's how they do it. They layer up thin crepes with all sorts of fillings, from sweet creams and fruits to savory cheeses and spinach. Basic crepe batter is pretty simple, just flour, eggs, milk, and butter. But when you stack them up and fill them just right, it turns into something special. Each layer was carefully assembled to ensure the flavors melded beautifully, providing a gourmet experience that was rare at the time. These crepe cakes were a hit because you could watch them being made right in front of you, which was pretty cool back then. Though they were a favorite for a while, as the Magic Pan spots closed down and eating out got more casual, crepe cakes weren't as common. When they served them, it was always with style, dressed up with a little sauce or a sprinkle of powdered sugar to make them look as good as they tasted. Resourcefulness has always been a defining trait of home cooking, and few dishes exemplify that better than Bologna cups. A simple yet inventive creation, this dish transformed a humble slice of bologna into an edible vessel filled with mashed potatoes, eggs, or even creamed vegetables. What started as a budget-friendly meal quickly became a quirky favorite in American kitchens during the 1970s. Bologna had long been a staple of frugal cooking, especially in post-war America when processed meats were widely available and inexpensive. By the time the 70s rolled around, bologna wasn't just for sandwiches anymore. It was being fried, stuffed, and repurposed in ways that made it feel like something more than just a lunchbox filler. Fried bologna was already a Southern tradition, but shaping it into crispy golden cups took it to another level, offering both texture and versatility. Some variations used scrambled eggs for a breakfast twist, while others turned them into bite-sized appetizers, topped with cheese or a dollop of mustard. Modern adaptations have seen bologna cups reimagined with gourmet fillings, but their original charm remains. Proof that sometimes the best ideas come from making the most of what's already in the fridge. Grits with cheese were one of the staples of Southern eating and culture for the longest time before Americans moved on from cornmeal. Hey, I get it. I'd probably tire of it if it was one of the only things I grew up on. People were just used to eating corn in all of its forms, and cornmeal was one of the most popular and normalized ones. As a result, cornmeal grits were common in most homes. Breakfast, lunch, or dinner, it really didn't matter. People could honestly just walk into a diner and expect them to serve grits. You didn't even have to take a look at the menu, since any roadside place worth its property value in salt would be serving one. Hell, they were easy enough to make at home. The cheese addition also made it a lot more palatable and made more Americans willing to try it. As far as Southern staples go, this one gets some use still, but only by old heads who remember the days of when you would have this for comfort food instead of a Big Mac and extra-large fries. 7-layer salad, on the other hand, goes back to the greener side of things, and you might get a little intimidated with a name like that. It's no 3-layer cake, as in, you will still be able to eat other things once you're done with this, so don't worry. It's actually this potluck dish that first popped up during the 1950s in the Midwest, and the reason it got that name is because of the way it's set up. Imagine, for just a second, lots of ingredients like iceberg lettuce, hard-boiled eggs, bacon, cheese, and mayo dressing, all layered up one by one in a clear dish. You can now see why the 7-layer aspect caught on. Plus, it wasn't just that this dish was really healthy and flavorful. It got popular for other reasons too. Most of the ingredients I just mentioned were things you could get under $5 total if you didn't already have them lying around. And in the 70s, especially during America's post-war period, people were tired. They were tired of the economy failing and rationing, all struggling to make ends meet. Long story short, they wanted food that was easy to make and prepare. Out with the 2-hour-long lasagnas and meatloaf, and in with the salads and sandwiches, I suppose. So now you have a dish that looks good, works with a potluck, and tastes even better. Of course it was going to catch on. And even today, a lot of households that had family recipes passed down still fondly make the dish. Why don't you give it a try the next time you're looking for gut-healthy food? Since it is America we're talking about, it wasn't all ideal nutrition and calorically smart eating all the time. For every salad you hear about on this list, rest assured there were double the amounts of burgers and greasy fusion food coming out, or desserts that were sugar rushes incarnate. In the 1970s, grabbing a snack off the grocery shelf was simple. No long ingredient lists, no allergy warnings, just food in a package. If a product contained peanuts, dairy, or wheat, it was up to the consumer to figure it out. Those with food allergies had to play detective, carefully reading labels, if they even listed all the ingredients. There were no bold warnings, no may contain statements, and certainly no standardized regulations to prevent cross-contamination. Food manufacturers weren't trying to be careless. The awareness just wasn't there. While allergies existed, they weren't as widely recognized as they are today. A peanut butter factory might also process cookies, but there was no obligation to disclose that. For those with severe allergies, eating processed food could be a game of Russian roulette. One mislabeled snack and a hospital trip wasn't out of the question. The turning point came in the late 1990s and early 2000s when food allergy cases became more widely studied, and advocacy groups pushed for better labeling. In 2004, the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act was passed, requiring clear identification of the top 8 allergens. Olives might not make a comeback anytime soon in today's world, but they will return on the list with egg and olive sandwiches. Like we said, olives were starting to get really hot as the ideal sandwich topping. Adaptable, flexible, and cheap is all you want out of an accessory to your sandwich. Like those fancy earrings that go perfect with your dress, olives and eggs went together like a Cupid-certified match made in heaven. People went wild around the mid-1970s for hard-boiled eggs and salted olives in their sandwich, green or black. Black olives got a bit more traction with eggs though, whereas greens synergized better with peanut butter. Would you ever try a sandwich that consists only of an egg and a fruit? By the way, you did know olives are fruits, right? So, something that people might still give an honest try today is cheese stuffed crust pizza. As delicious as it sounds and an affordable pizza to order from most pizzerias and houses, this was the king of the market. Usually it would come with your typical flavors like pepperoni and chicken mushrooms or sausages, but it would also have cheese-only alternatives. Crusts stuffed only with cheese with a pizza that has nothing but cheese was something Americans did not think twice about. Places like New York and Georgia would have at least like a quarter of their sales just due to this alone. Still, as good as that sounds, if your second thought was that it sounds like it would make me gain a couple pounds, then you are right. Definitely something people started to consider ordering less and less as time went on, and the appeal of a gym membership slowly started settling in. Another delicacy that is native to West Africa is ackee fruit, which in Jamaica is a widely consumed treat and is even their national fruit, but in America is currently banned by the FDA. This is all because ackee fruit, as tasty and soft as it can be, contains hypoglycin, which is a toxin that can cause an allergic reaction you really would not see coming. Let's just say it feels like one of the worst hangovers of your life, and that may be why the sickness caused by ackee fruit has a name. In the world of medicine, it is lovingly referred to as Jamaican vomiting sickness, but do not let pretenses fool you. If too much of it is consumed when it is very ripe, the fruit can very well be fatal. Hence why there's such a tight ban on it. Neapolitan ice cream sandwiches throw together classic flavors: vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry ice cream, squeezed between cookies or wafers. This treat took the old-school Neapolitan ice cream idea from Italy, where mixing up flavors was the thing, and turned it into a fun, easy-to-eat dessert. Having all those flavors in one bite made it super popular at family get-togethers and community events. It was a blast of color and taste that just felt like a party. But as the dessert scene got crowded with new, exotic flavors and gourmet options, these ice cream sandwiches didn't stand out as much. They were simple but effective, with clear layers of ice cream showing through the cookies, making every bite a mix of creamy and crunchy. Bright, jiggly, and packed with unexpected ingredients, gelatin salads were a staple at potlucks, holiday gatherings, and church suppers. Few embodied the era's love for playful food quite like 7-Up salad, a sweet and citrusy concoction that combined lime jello, crushed pineapple, mini marshmallows, and of course, 7-Up for an extra fizzy lift. The fascination with gelatin-based dishes stretched back decades, but by the mid-20th century, food manufacturers were marketing them as versatile, family-friendly options. Jell-O was no longer just a simple dessert. It was the foundation for countless salads that often blurred the line between side dish and dessert. Adding soda to the mix wasn't just about flavor, it introduced aeration, making the texture lighter and giving it a slightly effervescent quality. It required no baking, minimal prep, and could be made in advance, perfect for busy households. Some versions even folded in cream cheese or whipped topping for a creamier finish. Today, gelatin salads have become more of a nostalgic novelty than an everyday dish, but 7-Up salad remains a quirky reminder of a time when food was just as much about fun as it was about flavor. One of the soups that took off during the 1970s was stuffed cabbage soup. Remember how I said people really became besties with cabbage overall? Yeah, that meant that they were exploring its potential in every avenue of food known to the average American Joe. You had cabbage casseroles, cabbage stir-fries, cabbage stews, and now stuffed cabbage soup. I mean, on the one hand, it was boring as anything could be, and it really needed a lot of aromatics and seasonings to become something you could justify spending time on. On the other hand, it was dirty cheap, like unfairly cheap. And for some people, it was just free. That's right. If you had your own farmland with a crop-growing culture in your family, then you were likely raised growing cabbage, or at least having it in the home a lot. In rural areas, low-income ones and urban ones, For different reasons, whether it was the economics of it at all or the fact that modern American consumerism as they knew it was slowly heading to massive health problems for all participants, people flew like moths to cabbage soup. One of those, though not as sugary, was the apricot fluff. This first started getting a lot of movement in the 1960s because people suddenly got back into the alluring charm of whipped cream, and canned food culture had already sunk its teeth well into the populace, especially canned fruit. Now this dish involves whipped cream, canned apricots, and gelatin mixed together and chilled to make a nice and light dish that has the perfect fruity aftertaste to it, like apple pie. It started the culture of fluff food, which was always marked by its wallet-friendly nature and ease of preparation. Canned food was some of the cheapest stuff you could buy at a grocery mart, and making desserts out of that which the entire family could enjoy, down to the kids, was nothing short of some fine 10 out of 10 adulting. You can even put marshmallows in this too, by the way. A lot of people used to. I know I certainly would, and toast at that. A crisp autumn day in the 1970s wasn't complete without a trip to the local farm stand. Fresh apples, homemade pies, and of course, a jug of unpasteurized apple cider, cloudy, rich, and straight from the press. It was a seasonal tradition, the kind of drink you poured into a glass and sipped cold, or warmed up on the stove with a cinnamon stick. No labels, no expiration dates, just fresh pressed fruit in its purest form. For generations, farm-fresh juices were a staple, especially in rural areas where people trusted their local orchards. The juice was made by simply crushing fruit and collecting the liquid. No heat treatment, no extra processing, and because it wasn't filtered, it had that distinct, pulpy texture that store-bought juice just couldn't match. But as food safety research advanced, so did concerns over harmful bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. Unpasteurized juice, while natural, carried risks, especially for children and the elderly. By the 1990s, regulations tightened, requiring warning labels and, in many cases, pasteurization for commercial sale. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches might be a little ironic considering what we just talked about, but one thing they most definitely are is downright delicious. We know you are imagining it as you watch the video, and that is okay because, honestly, same. Crispy fried strips of bacon lathered in thick peanut butter are enough to get anyone's mind going. In the 70s, peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were the standard American breakfast, and they may have even started the stereotype of the US being a nation of bacon heads. When you get to the plates of every household in 50 states, you can claim a piece of culture for yourself too. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches remain in the Food Hall of Fame, and there was nothing like a fresh sandwich off the pan in the 70s. Ortolans suffered the worst of animal cruelty in a way that really makes you realize no dish is ever worth that kind of torture to another being. Ortolans themselves are these very small songbirds that get imported from France, and they really are about the size of an average thumb. Ortolans were prized for their flavor more than anything else, and eating them was considered to be a pastime of royals reserved exclusively for them. The way it would be prepared was sick, with the tiny things first being blinded to be overfed and then being thrown in brandy before they got marinated live. That's enough to make us lose our appetite for sure, and luckily it was banned in 1999 due to animal abuse. Imagine a cake that's like a party in every slice. That's tequila sunrise cake for you. It's inspired by the cocktail, mixing up orange zest and grenadine in the batter with a good shot of tequila to kick it up. The grenadine does its magic to make the cake look like a sunrise, all vibrant and inviting. This cake was a hit because who doesn't want to try a boozy dessert that looks as fun as it tastes? Perfect for adult parties and summer gatherings, this cake brought a zestful twist to any celebration. But as folks started leaning towards simpler and more wholesome flavors, this flashy cake became less of a go-to. When it's served up, it's usually all dressed up with an orange slice or a cherry on top, making it perfect for any bash. It's a fun twist on dessert, turning your typical cake into something that's a toast to good times. Since we are talking about foods that people would still give a fair try to in today's food scene, banana pudding pie is a great one to bring up. Soft but crispy pie crusts filled to the maximum with banana pudding topped with whipped cream and graham cracker crusts. For the average Joe in the 80s, you really could not ask for more, especially on a budget. Home chefs who specialize in baking would commonly make this with different variations. Most of them, like vanilla or cinnamon syrup, did not really help the fact that it was a bit more to eat than you could afford to, calorically. It was still in the not too healthy to eat but not bad enough to not eat at all zone, so it was a weekend favorite for many households. Plus, all it really took were simple ingredients that you might even already have lying around. Pies as a weekly concept, though, later on would be something that America would leave behind. Banana pudding pie along with it. Sometimes, the best recipes come from pure necessity. During the Great Depression and World War II, home cooks had to get creative with what was available, leading to some truly unexpected flavor combinations. By the time the 1970s rolled around, one of those Depression-era inventions was still making the rounds in American kitchens: tomato soup cake, a spiced dessert that sounded unusual but delivered surprising results. The acidity from the tomatoes helped enhance the cake's warm spices, typically cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, while also ensuring a soft, tender crumb. Despite its name, this wasn't a savory dish. The soup acted as a background player, subtly enriching the flavors rather than making it taste like a bowl of marinara. This cake reflected the era's frugality and ingenuity. What began as a wartime rationing trick had become a nostalgic favorite by the 70s, passed down through generations and featured in community cookbooks. Some versions included raisins or nuts for added texture, while others topped it with cream cheese frosting for extra indulgence. Vegetarian chili definitely had its heyday in the same time as those moments I was talking about. Listen, when I say movement, I don't mean a 3-day bandwagon full of peaceful sit-ins and protests like we have today. I mean, like nationally, parents everywhere were livid. They couldn't stand that their kids were actually preferring to stay inside with a McDonald's Happy Meal and the television screen, and lots of them became super proactive about their family's diet and eating habits because of the massive revamp in culture. I mean, in this same century, these people went from surviving off of foraging wild mushrooms to watching moving pictures on a screen, having a magic box that just cools all their food full-time, slow cookers, the internet, computers, and God knows what else. All this to say, it was a fast-paced era, and people reacted with what they knew worked: vegetables. If the Depression proved anything, it was that there was a massive problem with people's diets. It wasn't economical, and it definitely wasn't healthy, and the alternative wasn't as impossible to switch to as most people would have you believe. Circumstances like this saw the rise of vegetarian chili and vegan cookbooks, but unfortunately, it couldn't make the cut, especially in the South, where people just outright rejected it. You know, it's a little weird that German cuisine does not get more love in this country. Luckily, we have dishes like Black Forest Gâteau that challenge that stereotype in the most delicious ways possible. Whatever sparked that country's consuming passion for exploring foods of the wider world in the 70s, we desperately need that back today. The kids are growing up on peach raspberry vapes and Skittles. Anyway, this was one of those dishes with some presence. It became a symbol of sophisticated eating, and it was one of the finest multi-layered treats you could get your hands on. Americans absolutely loved having this in restaurants, and most French and European-themed joints did have their own version of a Black Forest Gâteau. It uses Kirschwasser, which is otherwise known as cherry brandy, as well as maraschino cherries and chocolate shavings. Some 1970s adaptations of the dish, which make it a little easier on the finances, usually skip the brandy, and there were many home chef cookbooks that made versions of the dessert aimed straight at home cooks that wanted to get a little taste of European dining while not ever having to step foot outside of America. fair play to them, but in my opinion, if you can spend a bit on this dish, you should because it really is an experience. While you can still find raw cider at some farm stands, it often comes with a disclaimer. In the 1970s, lighting up a cigarette at the dinner table wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Restaurants had ashtrays on every table, waiters took orders through a haze of smoke, and no one batted an eye if you alternated bites of steak with puffs of a Marlboro. Whether at home, in a diner, or even on an airplane, smoking while eating was just part of the culture. Back then, cigarette ads featured doctors, Hollywood icons, and even cartoon camels, reinforcing the idea that smoking wasn't just normal, it was sophisticated. Families would gather around the table, and after a home-cooked meal, someone would light up without a second thought. At fast food joints, parents puffed away while kids unwrapped cheeseburgers. Even in fancy restaurants, a good meal was often finished with a cigarette and a cup of coffee, like some kind of ritual. But as medical studies piled up linking secondhand smoke to serious health risks, the public's tolerance started to shift. The first major bans started in the late 80s, and by the 2000s, smoking in restaurants was virtually extinct. Sandwiches have always had an iconic space in American cuisines. The grilled cheese sandwich is especially iconic given the status it holds for being the best lunch snack. Kraft Foods profited off this love for grilled cheese and created Cheez Whiz on everything. This thin cheese spread quickly became the main ingredient in creating the perfect cheese sandwich. Dairy products like fresh cheese had a low shelf life as compared to the cheese spread. This prompted people to buy Cheez Whiz. In the 70s, the spread reached peak popularity amongst masses. This was until the original flavor was discontinued. The reason was simple. Kraft Foods wanted to improve their product to cater to a wider audience. They hoped by improving their original recipe, Cheez Whiz would be consumed by locals and gourmet chefs alike. The product came back onto the shelf pretty soon with a new formula. Today, the spread can be seen in homes and restaurants to create gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. Spam and pineapple sandwiches, on the other hand, are a Hawaiian invention that makes some stomachs less audible. On the other hand, if you are anything like us, then maybe the blend of spices, fruits, and canned pork and ham will create a unique flavor trip for you. Spam and pineapple sandwiches in the state of Hawaii would usually be accompanied with things like mango slices or mango chutney, peppers, chili pastes, and fresh coleslaw. All of this really elevated the dish and gave it a strong identity to pull from when it was making impressions on people for the first time in the 70s, and most were good ones. While pineapples are eternally hated in America, this is one mix of different foods that a lot of citizens could get in line for, and that is why we are sad to see this one gone. Nobody can go without margarine, the all-time quintessential breakfast food that everyone from everywhere, both in and out of the US, can agree on. One of the more relaxing parts of spreading big dabs of margarine on your toast is knowing that it is not really bad for you, and that should be the case by all means, until you add trans fats in. These fats would be put into the spread, and this was an industry-wide practice until it got banned by the FDA as it became linked to heart disease and diabetes. In particularly extreme cases, it puts you at a higher risk for cancer, and that is just too much trouble for butter of all things. Fruit cocktail cake is a throwback to when bakers loved using whatever was in the pantry, and canned fruit cocktail was a staple. This cake mixes the canned fruit, including the syrup, with standard cake fixings like flour and eggs. It's crowned with a brown sugar topping that gets all nice and crispy in the oven. It was super popular for its ease and the fact that you could whip it up on a whim. Often served at community potlucks and family reunions, this cake was a go-to for its convenience and crowd-pleasing sweetness. As fresher and more natural ingredients became the norm, though, this cake kinda took a back seat. It's typically baked in a square pan and served straight from the dish, making it the perfect comfort food at family gatherings. The moist texture with that sweet, crunchy top makes it a simple pleasure, just a real cozy, old-school dessert. That might be all we have for foods that work today, since the next one is chocolate-covered bacon. The eyebrow raiser you would expect it to be, this would be something that might actually have contributed to heart issues around the nation. We mean that partly as a joke and partly as a serious guess. If people did not have it every other day, it would not be that bad. No one needs educating on the actual health costs of bacon, but let's add chocolate to the mix. Now you see how that cost goes up by quite a few digits? Okay, we know you want to hear about what it was like. For those of you who are considering trying it, it was as good as it sounded. For the more reasonable viewers, you are probably glad this is not something you have to worry your kids might eat when you are not around. Presentation mattered in 1970s dining, and few dishes made a bolder visual statement than salmon mousse mold. A blend of canned salmon, cream cheese, and gelatin, this pastel-hued creation was shaped in decorative molds, often fish-shaped for maximum effect. What might seem like an eccentric relic today was once a centerpiece at cocktail parties and elegant luncheons. The origins of molded fish dishes date back centuries, but by the mid-20th century, gelatin-based foods had become a symbol of sophistication. This dish was a product of two prevailing trends: the love for molded foods and the growing popularity of convenience ingredients. Canned salmon was affordable and readily available, and cream cheese provided a rich, smooth texture that balanced out the fish's briny flavor. The post-war boom had ushered in an era of aspirational cooking, where the goal was to serve something that looked as impressive as it tasted. Plating mattered, and nothing said fancy quite like an intricate molded creation sitting on a bed of greens. Today, the dish still appears in retro-themed gatherings, though modern adaptations often ditch the gelatin in favor of a spreadable mousse, served with crackers instead of in sculpted form. Herring, where do we begin? It's one of the most beloved foods of the American nation, and one of those that becomes a shoulder to lean on in hard times. But that also means it's gotten way too much attention, and now the idea of herring is oversaturated. As in, everyone's had too much of it. That's why dishes like herring roe or fish eggs, as it's called in some places, help a lot. They breathe new life into these affordable classics that even our ancestors have been eating. Especially in the 1970s, where an interest in Scandinavian cuisine meant that people were exploring more seafood options for the first time and expanding their tastes beyond sardines, cod, and herring. However, lots of people decided to take what they experienced and apply it to what they love, and that's why we have dishes like herring roe today. Can you imagine that not only is this an affordable dish, it's also one that was served at cocktail parties and premium restaurants for a pretty penny? It definitely was one of the pricier starters you could get, and it got a knack for being cheaper than caviar while having more protein and being more compatible with the general tastes of the American public. You can feel wealthy eating caviar, but that doesn't mean you'll feel as happy as you would have if you ate some comforting herring. Back in the 1970s, hot dogs were everywhere, at ballparks, backyard cookouts, and school cafeterias. Whether boiled, grilled, or roasted over an open flame, they were an American staple. What few people realized, though, was that those perfectly pink Franks owed their color and long shelf life to a heavy dose of sodium nitrates. These preservatives kept hot dogs looking fresh and safe from bacterial growth, but over time, concerns started sizzling. Nitrates and nitrites were widely used in processed meats, not just for preservation, but also to enhance flavor. The problem? Studies began linking high nitrate consumption to potential cancer risks, particularly due to their conversion into nitrosamines, compounds found to be carcinogenic in lab tests. While no one was dropping their hot dog at the site of a study, health experts started warning against excessive consumption, especially for kids who were already eating them by the dozen. By the late 20th century, regulations tightened, and manufacturers began reducing nitrate levels while introducing uncured options with natural preservatives like celery powder. Today, nitrate-free hot dogs are an alternative, but traditional versions still exist, just with stricter oversight. Chicken roulade came to the United States through a French cookbook called Le Cuisinier Gascon. This book has the earliest traceable recipe of the iconic chicken roulade. Yet another poultry dish, the chicken roulade is made using chicken breasts that are stuffed with various fillings like spinach, cheese, or ham. The chicken is then baked until it is ready to eat. Chicken roulade was a famous entree at restaurants back in the day until chefs started to come up with newer and improved chicken main courses. This caused traditional recipes like chicken roulade to get sidelined and eventually discontinued. It experienced a comeback in 2005 when many cooking blogs rediscovered the traditional French dish. This caused several French restaurants across the states to bring this classic food back. What we cannot get are chicken salad and grape sandwiches. Seriously, what was the vision here and who signed off on it? Honestly, the most action this dish saw was when it was the weekend, and there were only leftovers and some odd assortment of fruits at home. Places like Rhode Island still had a fan base for the flavors this sandwich had, especially in early 1970s, and the highlight here really was the chicken salad. Not something you would have to enter a food coma, but definitely something you want if you are counting calories. Health-wise, this was probably the best sandwich you could get back then, when the alternatives were grease-loaded behemoths or experimental train wrecks. Most of the lovers of chicken salad and grape sandwiches dwindled a lot over the years, and now it is just a memory. Sassafras trees are deeply cherished cultural items because of their solace in the symbolism of many cultures, as well as the infamous sassafras tea that we keep hearing people raving about. A cup of this in the 70s was all you needed to fix your soul and wipe away the exhaustion of last week. However, the tree and tea itself may not be so healthy. The tea at least contains a carcinogen called safrole, which is found in large amounts in the tea, thereby making it pretty unsafe as well as a bad idea if you have any pre-existing breathing problems. Besides, some studies found that the root bark of the tree and the oil it secretes can be linked to cancer or liver damage. Maybe we should reevaluate how healthy this piece of foliage is? Wacky cake is also known as depression cake because it came about when stuff like eggs and milk were hard to come by. It's vegan by accident, using vinegar and baking soda to make it rise instead of eggs. This cake is all about being deliciously simple and affordable, mixing everything right in the baking pan, which means less mess too. Although it was a big deal back when fancy ingredients were scarce, it's not the showstopper it once was with all the fancy desserts out there now. Still, it remains a popular choice in vegan and eco-conscious communities for its minimal environmental impact and allergen-free ingredients. You usually just sprinkle some powdered sugar on top, and it's good to go. The moist, rich chocolate taste makes it hard to believe it's made without any dairy or eggs. It's just a smart, tasty solution when you're short on supplies. Next on the tour, we have soda bread, which is not what you think it is. Maybe you might be imagining 7-Up or Dr. Pepper bread, but what it actually was is short bread with baking soda. Yeah, the yeast went out the window and baking soda took its place. Other sweeteners would be added to it so that soda bread worked better as a munching food. And my God, did it not. People absolutely adored soda bread back then because of how easy and quick it was to make. All the leavening for the bread would come from baking soda and just a dash of buttermilk. If that sets your imagination all right, then we do not blame you because we agree with you. Unfortunately, while it is one of the few on this list we would like to see today, it is something that exists only in the past. Or maybe some really old photos of a sick Friday soda bread. Few ingredients have been as beloved in American kitchens as peanut butter. By the 1970s, it was a household staple, appearing in everything from sandwiches to desserts. But one of the most overlooked creations of the time was peanut butter bread, a no-yeast, one-bowl quick bread that delivered all the nutty richness of peanut butter in a dense, satisfying loaf. The concept of peanut butter as a baking ingredient wasn't new. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, recipes like this emerged as a way to make filling, protein-packed foods with minimal ingredients. Unlike traditional bread, this version skipped yeast entirely, relying on baking powder for leavening. It was a simple mix-and-bake solution at a time when home cooks valued both affordability and convenience. Culturally, this dish reflected America's love affair with peanut butter, which had skyrocketed in popularity after World War II. Families were looking for ways to use it beyond the usual peanut butter and jelly, and this bread offered a portable, sliceable alternative. Some versions leaned sweet, adding honey or cinnamon, while others remained purely savory, perfect for pairing with butter or jam. Now, I'll tell you what worked in the South and everywhere else. Fried bologna sandwiches. Hey, even the vegans had to reconsider. If you can't beat them, join them, right? No, seriously, these sandwiches were just that good. I don't know if they made bologna better back in the day or if they just laced it with magic drugs, but people were addicted, and I mean bad. This was the working class meal, especially in rural areas. Bologna wasn't only just delicious, it was also insanely affordable and one of the easiest meat products you could ever hope to get. In a post-war America where meat prices still hadn't fully recovered and become what they used to be, bologna sandwiches were more or less a godsend for everyone in the country. A budget-friendly meal before your long, grueling shift with a dash of protein to save your day and nutritional needs. Frying the bologna was also something people deeply took to because of how much flair it would add overall. A simple slice of bologna and some bread slices became the saving grace of many people's days back in the 70s. Over the years, General Mills has always been the gift horse that keeps on giving. But in 1971, it came out with the Hamburger Helper, and well, it definitely helped. This was a meal in a box with hamburger meat, and all you needed to prepare it was just water. General Mills understood that despite the current trends of the decade, there was still as much of a demand as ever for the typical, the classic, and the tried and tested. You could never separate Americans from their hamburgers, just like you couldn't take a fish out of water willingly. So it decided to target the biggest demand that was there in the decade, which was a way to have your favorite foods with half the effort. Work culture started booming. People didn't always have the time to go to a restaurant to pick out a burger, even if they were one of the families with a car then. So you had ground beef in a box that took nothing effort-wise to make and was affordable enough even in the face of rising meat prices from every retail seller and inflation. You could have dried pasta or rice along with it, which would come with the box, or you could just make an entire hamburger. The names are a little on the nose, but it really is your own personal hamburger helper. Mornings in the 1970s often started the same way. Parents sipping their coffee, kids getting ready for school, and, in many households, children drinking coffee right alongside the adults. It wasn't unusual. In fact, in some families it was encouraged, especially in certain cultural traditions where a little coffee with milk and sugar was considered perfectly fine for young ones. Some parents even believed it helped build character or made kids feel more grown up. Coffee for kids wasn't just about the caffeine, it was part of breakfast. Some children dunked their toast into it, while others drank a watered-down version, often loaded with sugar. It wasn't uncommon for grandparents to pour a little into a toddler's bottle, swearing it would keep them calm, an idea that hasn't exactly aged well. But as health studies evolved, concerns over caffeine's effects on developing bodies became harder to ignore. Doctors warned that regular consumption could stunt growth, interfere with sleep, and even lead to increased heart rates. While coffee itself was never banned for kids, the cultural norm slowly faded. Today, it's more likely to raise eyebrows than fill sippy cups. But back then, a cup of joe before school wasn't shocking. It was just part of growing up, one jittery sip at a time. For a change of pace, let us look at dishes that were less traditional. Salmon patties were a budget-friendly fish cake that emerged when budget food was in high demand. Let us set the scene. It is the Great Depression. People are hungry and many are sick. Poultry like chicken and beef was priced unbelievably. The canned salmon and salmon patties were brought in by the government to help as a last resort. This resort was quite successful as people fell in love with the delicious salmon patties. The patties had their peak in popularity in the Great Depression era, and past that, they faded out of memory as economic capacities settled. While the affordable can never came back, chefs created salmon patties inspired by the original taste. Today, you can find these patties being made with high-quality salmon and modern seasonings. No one does comfort food better than Americans, and the iconic potato chips and cheese sandwich is proof. People would grab cheddar or mozzarella cheese and a packet of Frito-Lays or a can of Pringles and get busy at the table but not in the kitchen. Reason being, this was one of those 10-minute dishes that took absolutely no effort or time to make, like instant noodles. Barbecue-flavored chips would be preferred because they added a secondary flavor, but all kinds were used and the crunch was just to die for. In the 1970s, chips like Pringles were getting more and more popular in America, and that made it even easier for this to take center stage. What would follow in the decades after was a growing concern for health, and people stopped making their favorite potato chips and cheese sandwiches, but we would love a 70s plate. That wraps up the wild ride through 100 unforgettable 70s recipes. Comment which one you'd actually try, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.